Hello, everyone. Gary here from Timeline Astrology. This is the July 2024 Sidereal forecast. Before I get into the transits, I just want to highlight a major theme that I think is there in July and a big turnaround that's happening. That would be a big theme in our lives for the next, well, many years, but certainly leading up to next year, this time next year, June 2025, when Saturn and Neptune conjoin in Pisces. At the moment, Saturn and Neptune are about to station retrograde, and this is as close as they're going to get for now. And then as they retrograde, they start to break apart more because Saturn goes faster in retrograde than Neptune. But by the time they finish their retrograde at the end of the year, Saturn will start to catch up with Neptune next year. And then again, by June of 2025, they'll meet by exact degree. At that point, we really do have to wake up to what is real. And in a way, this July 2024 is a sort of preview of what happens next year in a more extreme way. So there's a real wake-up call, essentially, by next year with Saturn and Neptune conjoined in Pisces. There's a dream that we all have in our mind's eye with Neptune and Pisces, an idealism that we have been entertaining, and perhaps even a delusion, a fantasy. And we just have to get really clear about what's possible without deluding ourselves. Because Saturn is the wake-up call. And by the time, like I said, next year they meet, it could be a real downer if we've been, all this time entertaining a fantasy that is never achievable, that was never going to happen. So Saturn's retrograde, and so I'll just go through the transits one by one. Saturn retrogrades in July, begins to move backwards from our perspective, from the perspective of sidereal Aquarius. Aquarius is very much about the plans that we have for our future, our hopes and dreams in a way as well, because it's all about our long-term objectives, our ambitions, our goals in life. But it's a fixed air sign, which is a weird sort of mix of energies, because how do you fix air? The chief characteristic of air is movement, right? But fixed air, what it essentially can mean is that we get fixated in our mind about how we should progress, how things must progress. And so that will tell you all you need to know about Saturn in retrograde now in Aquarius for the next few months, is that we have to be really open-minded and reroute our route essentially to get to where we want to go. We can't keep going the way we're going, because there's going to be something now in the next few months that is shown to us that clearly states, no, that's not the way forward. You can't do it that way. And maybe that's not even the route you want to take. Maybe that's not even what you really want. And so Saturn's retrograde will eventually take us there, wherever we need to go. By the end of the year, we'll end up with, okay, this is where I need to go. This is how I need to get there. It just depends on whether we beat our head against a brick wall for the next few months or not in getting there. And I think that's an important consideration for this Saturn retrograde in Aquarius. So to be patient in July as things turn around, as things might feel, more pressurized in a way. It's like you feel the urgency to do something. That's a retrograde planet. And Saturn represents time. And so the kind of constriction of time. I only have so much time. We need to get this done. You might feel like I want to get this done, right? It depends, of course, what it represents in your chart, what Aquarius is in your chart. For example, if somebody has Leo rising, it's relationships, right? And so there might be this sense of pressure now, more pressure even, on their relationship to get something done, to maybe resolve some conflict as well, because for Leo, Saturn also rules the sixth house of Capricorn. So there might be some need for conflict resolution, for example. So you can imagine a Leo rising having to kind of resolve some issues here, and it just could feel more pressurized, like that. It is more of an intense need to get it sorted. Again, depending on where that is in your chart. Now, if you're not already a patron, if you haven't signed up, consider signing up, because I go through the signs sign by sign and talk about each. So you can go to Timeline Astrology and find the links there. Apart from Saturn, I mentioned Neptune is also retrograde. And that is, again, from July until the end of the year. And this is a bit more, I guess, it's almost like if Saturn were a background hum that we kind of tune out of now and again, until sometimes it's switched off and then we miss it. Neptune is kind of like maybe a high-pitched sound that we don't hear, but it's still there and it's affecting us. Neptune is not a visible planet, so we don't see it with our naked eye, but it's there. It's influencing the zeitgeist. And so Neptune in Pisces is this kind of idealism that can kind of spill over into sort of fantasy and delusion. And more especially because Rahu, the north node of the moon, is also co-present in Pisces. So we're definitely potentially deluding ourselves or being deluded. And you might say, well, whether it's someone deluding us or we deluding ourselves, in a way, if we're deluding ourselves, we'll only meet those who delude us, right? If we're not clear about something, we'll only meet people who are not clear about it. So we have to kind of think as within, so without. We have to be mindful of our own need to go within now because it's a retrograde planet. And retrograde planets ask us to go within and find the truth. And in Pisces, Neptune retrograde is like going even deeper into our being to find the truth of who we really are from a spiritual point of view, even. But from a more practical sort of outward point of view, you might say, I've written here gently tugging at the seams of reality. I mean, things have to come undone in a way. Things cannot continue the way they're going in the world, quite obviously. But again, even in your life, you, yes, of course, want to keep a dream alive. That's what Neptune represents. But you don't want to be deluded. You don't want to have a fantasy that will never, ever be a reality. You want to actually unravel all of that to see what is possible and what's not possible. And then you won't be, like I said, by the time they both meet, Saturn and Neptune meet in Pisces next year, 2025, you won't be let down so much if you're very clear about what is possible. And you have to just obviously know what's possible. You have to know all the facts and all of the what is true, what is real. And once you know what's real, you're more likely to make it a reality. That's the kind of key thing. So that's the Saturn retrograde in Pisces for the next few months. Together with Saturn, I really do think July is a big turnaround in many ways that gets kind of finally sorted out next year by the time they meet in June of 2025. So let's look at what's happening in the more immediate time frame, though, with the transits. So the first one to talk about, the big one to talk about in July is Mars moving into Taurus. This is a biggie. The last time they met was on the 1st of August, 2022. A lot happened in the world at the time. There was a lot of geopolitical shifts, like almost like you can think of it as playing the sort of like moving pieces on the chessboard. I think things are going to potentially be quite volatile this time around, even more so perhaps because they're meeting in Taurus, the earth sign, and they're meeting in division of Taurus, which is ruled by the god of fire in the Vedic pantheon. So Agni is the god of fire, ruling Kritika is the lunar mansion. And so things are critical. That's where we get the word critical from, Kritika. Things have reached a critical state here, and I think we're going to see a lot of wildfires that are potentially very disruptive even to supply chains, even like in terms of energy. I even just today read that in the Balkan states, the extreme heat waves are knocking out power supplies, so they're having blackouts. So that's a perfect example of Mars, Uranus coming together in an Earth sign. And so wildfires, major disruptions, maybe even explosions. I don't want to be too dramatic, but it could be even sort of like earthquakes that disrupt things. Certainly energy is disrupted, I think, during this conjunction. And geopolitically, there's going to probably be more tension around the world. The fact that these are now in a square, Saturn in Aquarius and Mars, Uranus in Taurus, is just highlighting further tensions with Saturn retrograde now also. So there's going to be a major review on at the same time. There's going to be a lot of volatility and things kind of exploding onto the scene. So that conflict with the kind of big humanitarian issues and all of the issues because of wars. And essentially what we're doing is we're seeing them morphing from Aries, the sign of war, into Taurus now, the sign of resource, and how that has to, of course, have an impact. And it will have more and more of an impact over the coming years because Uranus is going to be in Taurus for 7 years. So Pluto, the whole while though, is in the background. It's again, maybe even a lower hum noise that we really don't hear at all. We just sense it maybe rumbling underneath the surface of things. Pluto is continuing to transit through Capricorn. It is also retrograde right now. And that's assisting deeper changes in ourselves personally, of course, but in the world, it's continuing to dismantle the world order. And whether you're aware of it or not, all of the chess pieces are being moved around in different ways at the moment in terms of the global economy, in terms of the BRICS nations and how all of these different things are happening sort of behind the scenes in a way. We don't really hear that much about them, but eventually we will hear a lot about them. Pluto eventually makes things very clear, but it's very slow in doing so. It slowly grinds away at things underneath the surface of things and eventually kind of erupts into the surface, right? It's like a volcano, right? Oh, that's what's going on, you know? And so if you're just mindful of it, that the Capricorn world order essentially is being dismantled before our very eyes, then we're maybe not so fearful of it because that's the other side of Pluto and Capricorn, or Pluto in general. We fear Pluto because we can't see it, essentially. And so when we sense it but we can't see it, it's like a floating anxiety in the air. It's kind of like, I don't know why I'm feeling a bit anxious, but I'm feeling it and I can't really pin it to anything. And if you just look at Pluto in your chart and the sign Capricorn, you're more likely going to be able to pin it to something. What does Capricorn represent for you? Because that area of your life has to go through a lot of change over the many years that Pluto is moving through Capricorn. So all of this together shows a big changes in July, of course, because the Pluto in Capricorn is trying to Mars Uranus in Taurus. And in a way, the changes that are happening are more easily implemented because of things falling apart. Because of Pluto in Capricorn, Uranus and Taurus is in the next few years likely to be more extreme changes because of things falling apart. Let's face it, you're not going to, gravitate to something new, especially in Taurus, because Taurus likes to keep things the same usually. It's a fixed earth sign, but we can't keep things the same because we know they're falling apart. So it's only when they fall apart that we're likely to kind of latch onto something new. And there's going to be a lot of new things in terms of the economy, in terms of even money. Digital currencies are happening all over the world. We're going to see this more and more over the coming years with Uranus and Taurus. Mars and Uranus and Taurus now is just maybe that it's going to be more felt. We might see that's Mars. It kind of pushes something into our awareness. It externalizes things. And again, even though that could also show major Earth changes in July, in other ways, in terms of the economy, I think it could also just bring things to light that we maybe weren't as conscious of previously. So that's Mars and Uranus in Taurus. The next one to talk about are the more immediate transits, the faster movers like the Venus, Mercury, and the Sun moving through Gemini into Cancer. So all of these planets moving into Cancer are going to oppose Pluto in Capricorn. So as again, the system is continually crashing, essentially, the whole world order is dissolving before our eyes. Planets moving into Cancer shows the need for safety and security and just maybe being at home and feeling nested and safe with our family and loved ones. And so this happens every year at this time. It's not unusual, of course, but it doesn't always happen with them opposite Pluto. So there's a real need for more safety. And, Capricorn is our work as well in a general way, and Cancer is our home lives, but also taking a time away from work, like a holiday. So as the sun moves into Cancer mid-July, again, sidereal Cancer I'm referring to, and as Venus moves in, and also Mercury moves in and out of for the next few months, because Mercury is in Cancer, then it moves into Leo by the end of July, then it moves retrograde in August and go back into Leo or back into Cancer in August, and then won't come out of Cancer until September. So Mercury opposite Pluto in Cancer, but then in Leo opposite Saturn, and back and forth between these two signs. There's a lot that we have to work out in the next few weeks, and a lot that will be disrupted in very basics, general everyday stuff, work, also travel, trade, communications, tech issues. I mean, if you're planning a holiday in August, more so, be mindful of that, especially around the 5th of August as Mercury goes retrograde. But all the time, actually, between the end of July and the beginning of September, there's a lot of disruption because of Mercury going back and forth between Cancer and Leo. And by the beginning of September, I might just allude to this at the very end. Venus is moving into Virgo, conjoining the South Node Ketu. There's a lot of disruption on the cards for the next few weeks. And I think if you're aware of it, you don't let it get to you. You don't plan your life so that you're like having a really heavy schedule for the beginning of August, for example. And for the beginning of September, with Venus in its sign of debilitation, conjunct the South Node, you factor that in, and you realize that maybe there's a bit of it's a bit of a downer, it's a bit of a damp squid in a sense, and it could affect your relationships or maybe finances. Mercury is just the basics, again, of travel, trade, and just communications in general and tech issues, and to be really mindful and patient with this transit, I would say. And all of the while all of this is happening, Mars is conjoining Uranus, and Mars is going to square Mercury. This is why this Mercury retrograde upcoming in August is going to be more frustrating, and create more disruption. So if there is major wildfires, if there is major like climate issues, how that affects travel and trade and just everyday life, really, the basics, and how we feel the need for more safety at this time as well because of all of these other transits that are going on. So these planets in Cancer are absolutely important in terms of finding our safe space and whatever's going on in the world around you, to be able to access that and feel a connection to your family, your home, community, and safety. So let's get to the new and full moons of July, which further highlight the theme of truth and getting to the truth and getting real. And also, I'm going to refer to the north node of the moon, Rahu, as it shifts signs or lunar mansions in the depths of Pisces, sidereal Pisces. But first, let's look at the new moon on July 5th, 6th in Purnarvasu in sidereal Gemini. This is about the return of the light, and it is all about finding that sort of light bulb moment and that kind of dawning, that realization. Again, it's about truth. And one of the symbols is an arrow and a bow and arrow, and actually returning the arrow to the quiver. It's more so symbolic here of seeing repeating patterns. It's kind of like being aware of our patterns, and that's kind of not even slow dawning, but that instantaneous dawning of, oh, that's what I do, oh, that's what it is. This is Purnavasu. So it bridges Gemini and Cancer, which, after the kind of storminess of the middle of Gemini, Ardra is a very stormy, kind of conflicted lunar mansion where we're trying to work something out. And Gemini is always working something out. We're always mentally trying to figure something out. But it's at the end of Gemini and bridging Gemini and Cancer that we come to that truth and realization that there's a deeper truth beyond the mind's fluctuations, essentially. So this Purnavasu is about that journey. And so, as one of my mentors, Kishori, refers to, the mind rooted in the heart field. This is Purnavasu, essentially. It's about the truth of who we really are from a deeper perspective, from the still center of our being, that doesn't have to work all of these things out, even though it enjoys doing that and it enjoys the precision of doing that, of getting clear about something. It's also just the clearness, the clarity, the still point in the center in many ways. The heart center, the heart field, as Kishori refers to. So this new moon on July 5th, 6th. It's an important time considering everything else I mentioned about finding out what is true and what is untrue, uncovering all these untruths. This is like a dawning, a realization that I think that we can all have on around the 5th, 6th of July. 2 weeks later, then on the 21st of July, we have the full moon in sidereal Capricorn. This is in the lunar mansion Uttara Ashada. Uttara, ladder, Ashada, invincible. And it is very much about sticking with something that we have decided is true. Again, all of the truth seeking that July highlights is here. And all of the resolution around finding out what is true and what is untrue. And again, it might be a bit of a downer initially because it's a full moon in Capricorn, conjoined Pluto, and then the moon joins Saturn, which is now fully retrograde in Aquarius. It might be a bit of a downer, or just might feel like a bit of a hard slog at this point, because it's like you had this kind of big idea, big dream, and big fantasy in your mind. And now it's like it's uncovered as an untruth. And now it's like, this is what's real and this is what you have to do. And it's like, okay, it's no longer that kind of big high fantasy that got us on a high. It's now a sort of like knuckling down and getting on with what you need to do. That's Capricorn. And this full moon in Capricorn creates this need to sort of, it's almost like being at base camp in a way, and maybe Aquarius being the peak, the summit. And we know we need to get there. At least now we know how to get there, more likely, or we know, well, at least we know how we're not going to get there at this point. Let me put it that way. But eventually we'll figure out how to get there. And how we get there is we need to knuckle down. And this is why this lunar mansion is referred to as an austere lunar mansion. It's a lot of austerity that is required in getting to where we need to go. Not where we might even want to go or like or have a fantasy about, certainly, but certainly what is achievable and what we need to do and get to where we need to go. We need to go, maybe not where we want to go. So again, that's why it could be a bit of a downer initially, but then when we eventually realize that we actually need to get there, then we kind of just get on with it. And the fact that this is a Guru Purnima in the Vedic calendar, this is the day to honor our teachers, our guides on the path. We recognize that actually it's easier to get to where we need to go when we follow people who have been there. Essentially, if you want to get somewhere, anywhere, whatever you want to learn, whatever you want to achieve in life, it doesn't have to be a spiritual objective. It could just be a thing I want to learn, to do, to get to achieve, to be successful in. You obviously want to follow people who have been there, who've done that. So this is the day on the full moon on July 21st to honor those who help you in getting to where you want to go, essentially. Again, it doesn't have to be a spiritual objective, even though ultimately that's what Guru Purnima represents. It could be just, again, an ambition that you have. So that's the full moon. Then I mentioned Rahu in Pisces, Sidereal Pisces, is moving back now from Revati at the very end of Pisces, and it moves backwards through signs. So it's going into the latter auspicious steps in Pisces, and it will move back into the former auspicious steps, Purva. So Uttara is the latter, Bhadra, auspicious Pada steps. And so it's the depths of Pisces that Rahu is now obscuring, essentially, potentially. But it's not obscuring it for no reason. You know, it's obscuring it so that we're reminded of what's untrue. And in a way, it's kind of like if we have a delusion in our mind about anything, if there's an untruth, we can latch onto that and almost create like more of confusion around that by creating more untruth. It's like when you know, when somebody lies and they have to keep lying to cover up their initial lie. This is the kind of thing that's happening here with Rahu in Pisces. There's a lot of untruths at this time. There's a lot of confusion. And because, again, Rahu goes retrograde, we're unlikely, just like with other planets now retrograding, with Neptune and Saturn and Pluto, all of these retrogrades, we're unlikely to get clear about something by seeking advice outwardly or looking at the world out there and trying to get clear about things unless we're clear within ourselves. And sometimes we have to get really clear about what we're not clear about or what our like distortions are. And Rahu is our distortions, essentially. So this obscuration occurs without obviously our conscious awareness. If we were aware that we were doing it, we might not do it, but maybe we would. I don't know. One of the analogies I use here is that of the cult leader. Rahu in Pisces is actually in a lot of cult leaders' birth charts. And the reason for that is whether the cult leader has initially had some sort of truth or realization, you know, you don't even know. Even if they had a sort of realization in the first place, they obscure that with Rahu in Pisces and create a lot of untruths from that and then hoodwink everybody else and get them to follow them. But that's even suggesting that they might not have had a truth, a realization in the first place. If somebody's actually realized, I mean, I don't think they would ever want to go out of their way to try and fool other people, really. But then we have to be open to that. Somebody could have an initial realization, but then also be deluded about it in some way. That's Rahu in Pisces, in this Uttara Bhadrapada. So it's kind of like the analogy could be used of going into the depths of our being, of consciousness, into the depths of the oceans. When you think about how things get very obscure down there, when you think about all the creatures that lurk below, it's kind of like what is true on the surface of things is not true on that and that kind of depth. And so thinking about that in terms of our own consciousness, if we take a really deluded notion down into our depths, into our consciousness, basically, it can further distort down there. So this is something to be really mindful of. And this is why people get into cults, essentially. You take some truth, twist it, and then go deeper in with it. And then like you really just prey on people's insecurities and need for certainty and sense of comfort. And that's why people will join a cult. And, you know, even in terms of our own lives now, thinking about what are we deluding ourselves with, and how do we uproot this and kind of really go into the depths of it and to see for what it is and to transform that in our being. You know, that's the other potential of Rahu here in Pisces, to, you know, to show all of these obsessive, compulsive, like distorted, you know, exaggerated at least thinking that we have that is blocking us from the truth of who we really are and the truth of what is possible, what is real. And all of these things, like I said, will be worked out in the coming years, especially beginning next year as all of these come together. Rahu, Neptune, Saturn, all coming together in the sign Pisces. So that is the month of July. I mean, I do think that it's an important month in a turnaround in many of these things, but it won't be clear from the get-go for sure. There's a lot of things that need to be processed here that will get eventually processed in the coming years. Just to highlight a couple of things that are upcoming, Mercury's retrograde in August, and you know, this one I think in particular could be disruptive, and I would say really through to September. As also Mars goes into Gemini in September and then aspects Venus, which is moving into Virgo and conjoining the South Node. I think there's a lot of disruptions in the latter part of August, all of August, really into September, the beginning of September, especially. So travel, trade, business, money, relations, you know, international relations as well as personal relationships, diplomacy, you know, this is quite volatile. And, you know, Mercury retrogrades are generally just typically annoying more than anything else. And they're not normally that, you know, big a deal. It's still like you're missing your flight, you're missing connections, flights or ground, protests, things like that, disrupt things, strikes, technical issues, all of these things, miscommunications, all of these things are then added to when you get a Mars aspect. You know, so while Mercury's retrograde in Leo, it's aspected by this Mars, which is conjunct Uranus and Taurus. So again, that highlights maybe disruptions in terms of blackouts and things. So just to be mindful of this for the rest of the summer months, July, August, September. But anyway, I'll talk more about that in the August forecast for you and for patrons. If you want to follow me as a patron, you will get wind of that sooner than anyone else. And also you'll get your sign-based forecast, which I'm doing exclusively for patrons now. So you can go to patreon.com/timeline astrology. And I also have this Scorpio audio club, a hidden, shall we say, Scorpio audio club for patrons. So I share more of the techniques of Indian astrology, as well as more topics, more in-depth topics. So you can go there, Scorpio Audio Club, and get it at patreon.com/timeline astrology. And a whole lot more besides. I share a lot with patrons, and you can sign up for just $5 a month. So you get a lot of content for just $5 a month. Okay, thank you so much for listening to this all the way through to the end. I wish you a very great month ahead. I think it is going to be exciting in many ways. It might be also nerve-wracking, but it's also, I imagine, revealing a lot of truths. So I hope that you have a slow dawning and not a rude awakening in July. And I wish you all the best. And until next time.